Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet by Diane DeGroat. She does the pictures and the words, and she always has there's a lot of Gilbert stories that I really love. Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet. This book was written in 1998, so it's like 22 years old, and it's still good. It didn't go bad. Look at the great pictures. Look, Gilbert, I'm a ballerina. Lola twirled around in her tutu. It's for Halloween, she said. What are you going to be? Gilbert held up the mask he was making and said, I'm going to be one of the Martian space pilots, Captain Zig. But don't tell anyone. I don't want anybody to copy my idea. Lola suddenly stopped twirling. I want to be a Martian space pilot too, she said. But I just finished making your costume, Mother said. You wanted to be a ballerina. You don't have to do everything I do, Gilbert said. Your costume is nice too. If I were you, I would be a ballerina. You would? Lola asked. Sure, said Gilbert, but I'm not you. So I'm going to be Captain Zig. The next day was Halloween, and Gilbert packed his Martian space pilot costume into a paper bag so he could change later at school. Lola copied him and put her pink ballerina costume into her paper bag also. You're too little to go to school, Gilbert said. I'll take you trick-or-treating when I get home, okay? Okay, said Lola. I'll practice. She held her bag open in front of Gilbert and said, Trick-or-treat! Smell my feet, Gilbert answered. I don't want to smell your feet. That's what you're supposed to say on Halloween, Gilbert said. Lola laughed and sang, Trick or treat, smell my feet, now give me something good to eat. Here's a treat, Gilbert said, and he dropped the piece of toast he was holding into her bag. After breakfast, Gilbert grabbed his paper bag and headed out the door. Goodbye, Gilbert, Father called from the kitchen. We'll watch for you in the costume parade. Lola followed her brother and said, I want to be in a parade too. You can come and watch, Gilbert said. I'll wave to you. Remember, I'll be the one in the Martian space pilot costume. Nice pictures, aren't they? Look at this. Oh, look at all the fall pictures. Looks like a regular neighborhood. And there is Gilbert and his friend Patty. Patty was waiting for Gilbert at the corner. What are you going to be for Halloween? She asked. Don't tell anyone, Gilbert whispered, but I'm going to be Captain Zig. I'm going to be a Martian space pilot too, said Patty. I'm going to be Admiral Xena. Hey, Gilbert said, being a Martian space pilot was my idea. Well, I guess we both had the same idea, said Patty. I hope no one else does. After lunch, Mrs. Bird stood in front of the class and said, Boys and girls, Principal Pines will be leading the parade today. We will all line up in the hall and then march single file out the main entrance and around the block. Stay with your class, and if you see your family or your neighbors, you may wave, but please don't leave the line. Then, when we come back to our room, we can have our party. Everyone shouted, Yay! Now you may line up to get into your costumes, Mrs. Bird said. Quietly. There's Mrs. Bird. There's Gilbert. Louis lined up behind Gilbert. He waved his monster mask in front of Gilbert's face and said, Trick or treat. Gilbert laughed and said, Smell my feet. Everyone snickered, except Mrs. Bird. She said, Louis and Gilbert, please go to the end of the line. Well, they got in trouble. They were the last one in the boys' room, and some of their classmates were already in their costumes. Gilbert counted 5 Martian space pilots. I'm Captain Zig, Frank said in a deep Captain Zig voice. I've come to save your planet. "Hey," said Gilbert, "you copied my idea. I was going to be Captain Zig." "Well," said Frank, "looks like a lot of us had the same idea." When the other boys finished dressing, they went back to the classroom. Not Gilbert. He wasn't excited about his costume anymore. He wished he had thought of something different, but now it was too late. He opened his bag. He closed it quickly and blinked hard. He opened his bag again. He wasn't looking at his Captain Zig costume. He was looking at Lola's ballerina costume. Gilbert pulled out the frilly pink tutu. "This must be some kind of trick," he said. He shook the bag, and out came a half-eaten piece of toast. "Then this is definitely not a treat." Look at his eyes. Gilbert thought a moment. If he had Lola's costume, she's got to have his. And she was probably wearing it right now, waiting for the parade. Gilbert needed to get it before the party, but he didn't want Mrs. Bird to catch him outside without a costume on. She would think Gilbert forgot to wear one, and she already scolded him once today. There was only one thing to do. Gilbert undressed and put on the tutu, tugging it up as far as it would go. And then he picked up the paper bag and he tore eye holes in it. It wasn't exactly a mask, but it was a disguise. He didn't want his friends to see him dressed as a ballerina. Oh my gosh, I wonder what his classmates will do. When Gilbert stepped into the hallway, his class was already passing through. No one recognized him, so he followed them down the hall and out the door. The street was lined with people watching and waving and taking pictures. Gilbert looked up and down the street, cutting in and out of the line. Uh-oh. But he couldn't find his sister anywhere. "Hey, quit pushing," somebody yelled. "It's not me," a tall space pilot said. "It's that girl with the bag on her head." They think he's a girl, and he's dressed as a ballerina. "Please stay in line," a teacher said. Gilbert recognized Mrs. Bird's voice behind him. Then he heard another voice he knew. "Look, Daddy, Gilbert's wearing my ballerina costume." It's his sister. Up ahead, he saw Lola standing next to Father, and she was wearing Gilbert's costume. "Hey, Gilbert," she called and waved. Gilbert looked around to make sure Mrs. Bird couldn't see him leave the line. He's totally breaking the rules. And he rushed over to Lola. "I need my costume, quick!" he shouted. "Gimme mine first," she said. "Stay with your class, boys and girls," a teacher said loudly. Gilbert grabbed Lola's hand and pulled her back toward the line with him. Lola thought she was going to be in the parade and headed with the big kids, but Gilbert pulled her right through the line. There he is, pulling her right through the line, and headed for the school. "Hey, where are we going?" she asked. "Someplace we can switch costumes," Gilbert said. He knew that the side door was a shortcut to the bathrooms. "Quick, this way!" But Lola wasn't very quick. She kept tripping over the too big costume. By the time they reached the boys' room, they were out of breath. Gilbert pushed the door open, and there was Louis, standing in his underwear. "Hey, no girls allowed," Louis yelled. "Let's try the girls' room." Look at his underwear. It's all little. Look at her face. Look at Gilbert's eyes. He was in his underwear. That's so funny. "Let's try the girls' room," Lola said helpfully. "No way," said Gilbert. "Come on. Maybe my classroom is still empty." Oh, this is getting so exciting. They ran down the hall to Mrs. Bird's room. They just reached the door when Lola tripped on her costume. And Gilbert tripped on Lola. They tumbled inside, right into the middle of the party. Look at, there she is on the floor. He's tripping. His glasses are falling off. There's a party. They all saw him. What are they going to do? We'll have to find out how his classmates are going to treat him. I hope they're kind. Gilbert's paper mask had flown off. Everyone was staring at him and his tutu. Gilbert did the only thing he could think of. He twirled around the room put his arms over his head and said, "Ta-da!" Look at him. He's working it. He's working the costume. There was a long silence. "Gilbert," Frank said finally, "what are you supposed to be?" "He's a ballerina, silly," said Lola, as Mrs. Bird helped her to her feet, "and I'm Captain Zig." Patty said, "Well, Gilbert, at least you didn't have the same costume as everybody else." "Of course not," said Gilbert. "I wanted to be something different. My sister here wanted to be a space pilot like everyone else, but not me," he said proudly. And then he twirled across the room to the refreshment table. Soon Father appeared at the door to take Lola home. Miss Bird gave her some pumpkin cookies to take back with her. "Trick or treat," Mrs. Bird said, handing her the bag. "Smell my feet," Lola answered. She passed Gilbert on the way out. "Are you still going to take me trick-or-treating, Gilbert?" "I guess so," he said. "And Gilbert?" "What?" "This time, can I be the ballerina?" Gilbert laughed. "Don't you want to be a space Martian anymore?" "Nope," she said, taking Father's hand. "If I were you, I'd be one. But I'm me, so I'm going to be a ballerina." And she skipped out the door, singing, "Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat." I love Gilbert and his adventures. I hope you liked it too.